and welcome. I'm Dick Forbes, and this is our second installment of our Bible study that we're doing on Esther. So I hope you'll enjoy this. I hope you enjoyed the last one, but we're going to talk about last time we talked about Esther, and she was the protagonist, and today we're going to talk about the antagonist in this story. And I'm going to read out of Esther chapter 3 and then jump down to chapter 6 there too. After these things, King Xerxes promoted Haman and Agagite, the son of Hammedatha, and advanced him and set his throne above all the officials who were with him. And all the king's servants who were at the king's gate bowed down and paid homage to Haman, for the king had so commanded concerning him. But Mordecai did not bow down or pay homage. Then the king's servants who were at the king's gate said to Mordecai, "Why do you transgress the king's command?" And when they spoke to him day after day, he would not listen to them. They told Haman, and in order to see whether Mordecai's words would stand, for he had told them that he was a Jew. And when Haman saw that Mordecai did not bow down or pay homage to him, Haman was filled with fury. But he disdained to lay hands on Mordecai alone. So as they had made known to him the people of Mordecai, Haman sought to destroy all the Jews, the people of Mordecai, throughout the whole kingdom of Xerxes. Down to chapter 6. On that night the king could not sleep, and he gave orders to bring the book of memorial deeds, the Chronicles, and they were read before the king. And it was found written how Mordecai had told Bigthana and Teresh, two of the king's eunuchs who guarded the threshold and who had sought to lay hands on the king Xerxes. And the king said, "What honor or distinction has been bestowed upon Mordecai for this?" The king's young men who attended him said, "Nothing has been done for him." And the king said, "Who's in the court?" Now Haman had just entered the outer court of the king's palace to speak to the king about having Mordecai hanged on the gallows that he had prepared for him. And the king's young men told him, "Haman is there, standing in the court." And the king said, "Let him come in." So Haman came in, and the king said to him, "What should be done to the man whom the king delights to honor?" And Haman said to himself, "Whom would the king delight to honor more than me?" And Haman said to the king, "For the man whom the king delights to honor, let royal robes be brought, which the king has worn, and the horse that the king has ridden, and on whose head a royal crown is set. And let the robes and the horse be handed over to one of the king's most noble officials. Let them dress the man whom the king delights to honor, and let them lead him on the horse through the square of the city, proclaiming before him, 'Thus shall it be done to the man whom the king delights to honor.' Then the king said to Haman, 'Hurry, take the robes and the horse as you have said, and do so to Mordecai the Jew who sits at the king's gate. Leave out nothing that you have mentioned.'" All right, so, the story, you see the twist and the turn begin to take place there. And the book of Esther we've been talking about, it's the hiddenness of God. And last week we talked about the silent sovereignty of God. And remember that Esther is in the position to save her people. And she is, like I said, she's the protagonist, but Haman becomes the antagonist, the villain in this story. And probably Haman is the most vivid case study on pride and humility, and which happens when it goes unchecked in the whole Bible. It's a great case study, and that's what we're going to look at today. And if you listen, it might save your life. And I say that very seriously because we want to look at pride. Pride, what is it? What is the character of pride? What makes it up? And then two, talk about the deadliness of pride, what it does to us. And then three, what's the absolute cure for it in our lives right there? So the character, the deadliness of it, and the cure that's there. Excuse me. Now if we go back to verse 1, where we see in chapter 3, after these things, King Xerxes promoted Haman the Agagite to the son of Hammedatha, and advanced him to set his throne above all the officials who were with him. So anyway, so he basically made him the prime minister at the time. But you've got to also realize Haman must have been an obnoxious person, because the king had to order everybody to bow down and kneel to him. And so, if you go into some other cultures, bowing is just instinctive. And some of the cultures, you bow to your elders, you bow to people that are in a higher position in life than you are. And so it's just instinctive, and it's part of the social order for those cultures that are there. But obviously, like I said, Haman had to be pretty obnoxious here to command the people to bow down to him. And in chapter 5, he brags about it to his family, to his wife, to all his friends that are there. He goes on and says, that people bow down and worship me. And Haman says to us, says, but there's this satisfaction that he's not getting. And what is that satisfaction? That satisfaction is the fact that Mordecai will not bow down to him. Now, again, you begin to see the pride that begins to take place here. And what does the Bible say what pride is? The Bible says that pride is concentration and absorption on ourselves that are there. C.S. Lewis has a great definition of it, and I'll quote Lewis. I'll quote Lewis quite a bit as we go through this. He said, this is what Lewis in Mere Christianity on the chapter on pride, he says, pride gets no pleasure out of having something, only out of having more of it than the next man. You may think you're proud of being successful or your intelligence or good looking, but you're not, because you're surrounded by other people who have much more success, intelligence, or looks. You lose all pleasure in them. Lust may actually drive you to sleep with a beautiful woman because you want her. Pride, however, drives you to sleep with a beautiful woman just to prove to everyone, including yourself, that you can do it, and do it over all others. A proud man gets no real pleasure from the woman. It's all about him. And so again, remember, pride turns everything into me. It's all about me at that point. And I think Lewis is right about that. Pride's a means to the end, and Haman has no satisfaction here until he gets either Mordecai to kneel or he hangs him from that gallows that's there. And so, he wants respect, he wants approval. It's an endless ego. It's an ego about calculation. How am I going to make this happen? And am I getting the thanks I deserve? Am I getting the appreciation that I deserve? How do I look? How about me? What about me? Now, there's two forms of pride that we have to look at. Tim Keller talks about this. He says there's a superiority form and an inferiority form. He says the superiority form is that we always comparing ourselves. We think we're superior to people. We're calculating our looks, what we're doing. Are we appreciated? We look down on people. That's the superiority form of pride. The inferiority form of pride is we're down on ourselves all the time. Whereas they're self-conscious, we're self-absorbed just as much. We don't like the way we look. We don't like what we're doing. We beat ourselves up all the time. So there's still absorption on self. Both of them are, the superiority and the inferiority to there. And they have a whole lot more in common than a humble person does. Humility, according to the Bible, is not thinking less of yourselves, but thinking of yourself less. Instead of you're not thinking about yourselves all the time. You're not needy. You're not looking out for yourself. You're not looking for approval. You're not looking for respects. You do it just because it's the right thing to do. And that's what humble people are. You ever been around a humble person before? Now, you wouldn't walk away thinking, what a humble person they are, but you would think how happy they are. And then you would think how interested they were in you and not thinking about themselves in this whole process. So there again, you begin to see a humble person, but you walk away from that person, kind of feeling good. Why? It's because what they did for you. Screwtape, C.S. Lewis wrote a book called Screwtapes. And in that book, he talks about that. He talks about the enemy and the patience. And what he says, the enemy is Christ, and we're the patients that are there. And he talks about pride in there. Now, Screwtape is an elder demon talking to an inferior demon that's there. And so what he's doing, he's kind of getting to hone in on this pride thing right there. And this is what he says. And he says, you must conceal from your patient the real nature of humility. Let him think of it not as a self-forgetfulness, but as a low opinion of his own talents and character. To thwart the enemy, we must consider his aims. He wants to bring your man into the state of mind in which he could design the best cathedral in the world and know it is to be the best, and rejoice in the fact that being any more or less glad to having done it than it had been done by another person. In other words, the cathedral, he took joy in it whether he built it or not. That's when pride is missing there. And he goes on to say, he says, our enemy, who you see, wants to turn the man's attention away from self altogether towards him and the man's neighbor. Remember, both vainglory and self-contentment equally keep the mind on self. Both can be, therefore, the starting point for some wonderful contentment of ourselves, other people, cynicism, and cruelty. Again, it's what pride is all about right there. And he goes through this. He's trying to teach this guy. He said, this is how you do. This is what you focus on. You get them to focus on themselves. You don't get them to focus on the enemy at that point. So, anyway, so you know, Haman's come in. He's come to the king, and they've named this day of slaughter. And thousands of Jews are going to die. I don't know how many would have died, but you know, Haman's going to die all too. Because the Bible tells us over and over and over and over again about pride. Pride goes before the fall and destruction. Pride is deadly. All pride is deadly. So let me show you. Let me give you some examples of this. Number one, pride makes a fool of ourselves. In other words, it keeps you from learning from our mistakes. We justify it, we make excuses for it, we blame others. It's never our fault or anything there. And so it makes fools out of us because we never learn from it. We're not about to learn from it. And so it does. We have this falling out with him or her. It's always their fault that's there. So it makes a fool of us in the long run. Humble, not looking at self. We don't learn fast. You know, we just ignore it. Humble people, they do look at themselves and they do learn fast from this. Second thing that it does is that pride won't let us receive any kind of criticism there. And that's sometimes criticism is the best way for you and I to grow. Because superiority pride, we dismiss or attack the person that criticizes them. They don't know what they're talking about. They're an idiot. You know, how dare they say something like, they don't know what's really going on here. Whereas the inferiority pride, they're devastated. There's a meltdown. They're a puddle of goo at that point. And they're almost unapproachable at times. There's this obscure little verse in Ecclesiastes, and it talks about the foolish king who cannot be admonished anymore. In other words, it's saying this old king has gotten to a place that everything he has said is law. You cannot rebuke him, you cannot criticize him, you cannot tell him anything. And we know people like that. We know people that they're foolish. They cannot be admonished. They cannot be told the truth. They cannot be corrected because they will blow you off. They'll dismiss you. They'll attack you. They'll do all these things towards you. You know, as a child of God, we should never, ever get to that place where we can't be admonished, that we can't be corrected, that we can't learn from our mistakes that are there. So we got to be careful. This pride is deadly. In other words, the old foolish king was nothing more than a walking tomb, just waiting to die because he could not be corrected in life. So it makes us a fool. We can't be criticized from it. And we end up making a lot of bad choices in life. We choose wrong relationships because what we do, the superiority pride, we overestimate our gifts. You know, here I am. I'm best thing since sliced bread. I'm God's gift to mankind. You know, so we overestimate our gifts that are there. And the inferiority pride says this, we underestimate our gifts that are there. So we end up making wrong choices because when I overestimate, I think I'm better than this. When we underestimate, we don't think we're as good as. And so we make bad choices along the way. You know, people above the prideful person, they disrespect, they're resentful towards that person, they resent that person. And below, they disdain, they're less than, they're not as good as that's there. So we've got to take into account, what does pride do for us? It's deadly. Pride also, it makes us evil. How did the devil become the devil? Pride. Pride made the devil a devil. St. Augustine, who I love what he said about pride. He said, pride is not the one sin among many, but really the root of all other sins. In other words, pride is the sin below the sin. You know, why do I lie? Pride. I don't want to look foolish. I don't want to get caught. Why do I steal? Pride. You know, or pride, I want to make others look foolish. I want to put other people down. I want to criticize other people. Pride is the sin below the sin. It just lies there, and we're not even aware of it so many times it's there. And so Augustine was right when he said that. He said it's the sin below the sin that's there. Let me show you this too. You know, pride is that hellish petri dish that just grows and grows and grows in a person that's there. You know, all of us struggle or have struggled with bitterness or resentment somewhere in our life. You know, something that's been done to us, something that's been said to us. It might be towards a class of people. It might be towards a race of people. It might be towards a certain population. But yet there's that bitterness and resentment that we have there. And we have anger towards there. Now, listen, you can't stay angry or bitter to someone unless you feel superior to them. No bitterness without pride. I would never do that to that person. I would never act that way to it. I would never say something insensitive to that person. You know, when those words come out of our mouths, we don't know ourselves. In other words, I cannot be bitter towards a person if I don't have pride in there. Pride makes me bitter and resentful towards somebody. It just does. Because again, if I feel superior than somebody, I'm going to be resentful and bitter towards them because I would never treat somebody like that. I would never do that to them. Pride also, it paralyzes us with fear and worry. Because you know what? We know how things are supposed to be. And we're freaking out when things don't go our way. Well, how do I know they're not supposed to go that way? Well, we just know. We just know, right? Because we know what's best for us. And so when God seems to be taking us in a different direction, you know, we get freaked out, we get worried, we get anxious. God, you sure you know what you're doing? You sure that's the right course of action for me that's there? Pride makes us very opinionated about things. It makes us also indecisive. Superiority, opinionated. Inferiority, we're indecisive because we're afraid. If you think about, at the bottom of this all, too, is fear. Fear of what? Fear of looking foolish. Fear of making the mistake. Fear of displeasing somebody. Fear is motivated. It turns into anxiety. It turns into resentment. It turns into bitterness. It turns into people-pleasing. It turns into prejudice. It turns into criticism and judgment of other people. It turns into last word freaks. And fear pushes that pride that's right there and pushes right out the door right there. It also has a social evil component to it. There's racial superiority, there's class pride, there's national pride, there's imperialism that took place. And you know, before this week is over, we're starting a new week today, it's a Sunday. Think how many young men are going to be killed on the streets in our country because of pride. Because they feel disrespected, because they feel this, but they feel that. And it's all because of pride. Pride also, it's the sin that hides itself. What do I mean? Pride is that sin that's the carbon monoxide in our lives that's there. And it's killing us without any of us know us. Because the less prideful you think you are, you know, the more prideful that we really are. You know when you're committing adultery. This isn't my spouse, you know. Or you know when you're committing embezzlement. Well, how'd that $300,000 end up in my checking account that's there? You know when those things are happening, but we don't know when we're being proud that's there. Joseph Epstein, in his book on pride and envy, he says this. He says, why do we hate snobs? You know, because snobs look down on people. And what he says basically, you know, well, we look down on the snobs. So we're people that look down on people for looking down on people that's there because we feel superiority. I would never look down on people like that, but look at them. And you think that's exactly what's going on in our culture today. It's going on politically, it's going on religiously, it's going on economically. You know, we think we're superior to those people because they don't live like us and they don't think like us. It's pride. When I come to the point that everybody is trying the same level field, that we're all trying to find those things in life, and those things in life are to be loved by our Creator, to be accepted by our Creator, to be all those things. All of us have that human longing to be loved unconditionally. But yet we look down on people, but yet we're all the same, and we're all striving for that thing, to find that peace, to find that relationship with God that forgives us of our sins and takes away our shame and our guilt that's there. And so we can't go into this feeling superiority. Let me take this one step further that's here. Let me ask you this. If you've been listening to me, how many of you are out there thinking about, well, I know somebody that he's describing. I know a couple of people that he's describing. Or we think, God, I know somebody needs to listen to this. You know, aren't we guilty of that? You know, you couldn't have gotten through this without thinking about somebody other than yourselves that you think, well, they're just like what he's describing like that. So again, we describe kind of what it is. We describe the deadliness of it. So there's a third point here that's there. And the third point is that solution. What's the cure here? Well, you know, we need to become close to God. We need to humble ourselves. We need to pray, et cetera, on and on. But I tell you, that's not the answer. Not me just telling you to go to God is not the answer here, because you can become a very religious person. And religious pride is probably the worst of the worst of the worst of the worst. It just is. Now, should I pray? Should I get close to God? Should I read my Bible? Absolutely. But if I'm doing those things to make myself feel moral superiority to other people, to know that I have arrived, to know that I have found what that very thing that's going to make me whole, you know, then religious pride is the worst. Pharisaical pride is the absolute worst there. Jonathan Edwards, on his famous sermon on charity and fruitfulness in his book, he says this. He says, "No, God doesn't create humility, and therefore I will try to live up to that standard or feel like I can't live up to it." There's superiority pride in religious circles. I don't do this, I don't do that, I'm not like those people. And so there is this better than myself kind of thinking that's out there. Or the inferiority one is I'll never measure up to that standard. I can never be that good, and on and go. So Edwards is right in what he's describing. It's where pride sneaks in. So are we cooked? No. Let's talk about what the cure is. Now, if you go back to chapter 6 and verse 4 right there that we read, and he says, "And the king said, who is in the court?" Now, Haman had just entered the outer court of the king's palace to speak to the king about having Mordecai hanged on the gallows that he had prepared for him. And so he's going in there, and the king can't sleep up to this point. And these chronicles were read to him by his servants, and they tell the story about, you know, the two guards at the gate that wanted to assassinate Xerxes, and Mordecai overheard it. Mordecai told Esther, Esther told the king. But he wasn't rewarded for all this. And so he calls Haman in. He said, "Haman, what would you do for a man that the king delights to honor? What would you do for him?" And Haman comes up with this great story. He goes, "I would put the king's robes on him, the robe that the king had worn. I would have him ride on a horse that the king had ridden on. And I would have one of his nobles, an honored man, be the servant and lead the horse through the city so that people could honor this man." And you think about it, let me talk about the robe just for a minute. What did the robe really mean? The robe meant a whole lot more than we give it credit for, because you think about it, when Pharaoh put the robe on Joseph, what was he saying to Joseph? Joseph, you can partake as the king. Your word's good. You only report to me. Remember when David and Jonathan were together, and Jonathan put his robe, his kingly robe, on David, and he said, "I love you. You're the one that deserves to be king, not me." Remember the prodigal son when he came home and his father said, "Put a robe on him." Why? He could partake in the family. He was back home again that was there. But the king wanted to delight in somebody. So he said, "Haman, go and do this." Can you imagine what Haman was feeling that morning? Because he came in there and he wanted to come up with this exotic plan to kill all the Jews the day they slaughtered them. And the thing is, the king never asked who these people were because he gave him permission to. He never asked who these people were. Because what had happened is Xerxes had gone on this war in Greece, and a lot of the coffers, the money in the coffer had been spent. And Haman says, we kill all these people, a lot of that money is going to come back into the treasury of the king right there. So Haman's looking for something. Haman's looking for love right here. And he wants to be loved by the king. Then they will know I'm somebody. Then they will know who I am. They will know my worth and value when the king honors me. That's there. It's what we all want. Haman really wasn't asking for the wrong thing. He was just asking the wrong king that was there. We want something the world We want someone to think the world of us. We want somebody to love us who we think the world of that's there. Luc Ferry, who's a French philosopher, he said this. He called it the praise of the praiseworthy is above all rewards. To be praised by the praiseworthy is above all rewards that's there. We're all looking for that. If I was loved like that, the king loving me like that, now Haman had a reversal of fortunes going on right now. He's pretty much doomed at this point. Mordecai is exalted and Haman is humiliated. And again, this is what the Bible teaches. It says, humble yourself and you'll be exalted. Exalt yourself and you're going to get humbled. That was there for that. And it's that principle of life that we need to live by. And so we go on and we look at this and we try to find that. We try to find that deep, deep love inside of all of us, that we want to be loved by something that we think the world of. Again, Lewis, when he goes back, and this is in Mere Christianity again, he says, like I said, Haman was not looking, he wasn't asking the wrong question. He was looking to be loved like all of us are. We all want someone to glory to glory in us. Not just to love in general, but we want the praise of the praiseworthy. That's what we all want. We want the love of the King that's there. And Lewis goes on, he says this is in Mere Christianity. He says, about how do I get humility that's there? He says, lose yourself to find it. Does that sound strange? It works in everyday matters as well. In social life, you'll never make a good impression on people until you stop so much trying to make a good impression on people. In literature and art, you will never be original until you stop trying so hard to be original. The principle runs through life from top to bottom. Lose your life and you'll save it. Look for yourself and you will find the long run only hatred, loneliness, despair, rage, ruin, and decay. But look to Christ and you will find Him. And with Him, everything else will be thrown in. Humility. Quit trying so hard. Quit trying to impress other people. Quit trying to be so original. Quit trying to be so witty. Quit trying to, make yourself look better than everybody else. And so it's what we all want. We all want that love that Haman was looking for, to be praised by the praiseworthy was there. But like I said a little while ago, he was asking the wrong king. Now, we have a king. We have a king with ultimate glory that left his palace. He stripped himself, not only naked to lay on that cross, but he stripped himself of his Father's love and respect for us. He was stripped of his Father's approval. He was respect of, so many things. Why? Why did he do that? Because he was reversing places with us. Mordecai's reversal was involuntary by Haman. Our reversal with Christ for us is voluntary by Jesus. Jesus the King, we can go to reverse places with us. Stripped naked so we're clothed by Him. John 17:4 says, when He's praying, He said, Father, give them the glory that You gave Me in the foundations of the world. He's asking God the Father to give us the glory the glory to delight in. The man the King delights to honor in. Ultimate praise and praiseworthy. The light of the robes are ours. Ego. God is reversing places with us, not just to believe, but He had to die. And He had to die this. The fact that He had to die because I was such a sinner humbles me. The fact that He died on the cross affirms me how much He loves me. And how do I look at that? Jesus was strong enough to be weak. He was strong enough to do the right thing that was there. He didn't care what people thought of Him. He went on to do it. Lewis, again, he says this, and again, most of this is out of Mere Christianity if you want to get the book that's there. Lewis says this, he says, the only way you can take a step to getting this healing, to take down into yourself the degree you understand He did it for you. To that degree, you have the inner assurance and glory and joy that will enable you to move out with the blessed self-forgetfulness we all need. So here's what Lewis is saying. If anyone would like to acquire humility, I think I can tell him the first step. The first step is to realize that one is proud. and a biggish step too. At least nothing whatever can be done before it. If you think you're not conceited, it means you're very conceited indeed.